I woke up that Tuesday morning to a house so cold my breath was visible inside my own bedroom, and I knew something was seriously wrong because the forecast said it was negative 12 degrees outside in Burlington, Vermont. My name is Oliver Manning, and I had lived in this townhouse for 3 years without any major problems until 6 months ago, when Patricia Henderson became the president of our homeowners association. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA Karen, a woman in her mid-50s with that distinctive blonde bob haircut that seemed to be standard issue for people who love complaining about mailbox colors and lawn length. Patricia had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our HOA handbook, plus about a dozen more she seemed to make up on the spot. I stumbled out of bed wearing 2 layers of clothing and immediately went to check my thermostat. The screen was lit up and functioning, but the temperature reading showed 52 degrees inside when it should have been a comfortable 70. I had set it to 70 before going to bed, like I did every night during these brutal Vermont winters. The heating system was running, I could hear it, but something was definitely not working right. After throwing on a heavy jacket, I went outside to check my roof. That is when I saw it. The heating cable I had installed along my roofline and gutters 3 weeks ago had been cut. Not damaged by weather, not accidentally broken, but deliberately cut with what looked like wire cutters. Clean cuts in multiple places. The cable was supposed to prevent ice dams from forming on my roof and keep my gutters clear. More importantly, it was supposed to help regulate the temperature in my attic space, which affected my overall heating efficiency. I stood there in the freezing morning air, staring at the severed cables, feeling my anger rise faster than the sun on the horizon. This was not just vandalism. In weather like this, ice dams could cause serious damage to a roof, leading to leaks and potentially thousands of dollars in repairs. Whoever did this had not just inconvenienced me, they had put my home at risk. I pulled out my phone and took about 20 photos from different angles, making sure to capture the clean cuts and the way the cables were clearly severed intentionally. Then, I went back inside and made myself a strong cup of coffee while I tried to figure out who would do something like this. It did not take long. About 45 minutes later, while I was still drinking my coffee and looking up heating cable repair services, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Patricia Henderson with her clipboard, her pinched expression, and her permanent air of disapproval. "Good morning, Oliver," she said in that tone that made good morning sound like an accusation. "I am here to follow up on the violation notice I left on your door last week." "Violation notice," I said. "I never got any violation notice." She made a show of checking her clipboard. "I left it right here on your door last Thursday at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon. It stated that your heating cables were not approved by the HOA Architectural Committee and needed to be removed immediately." "You cut my heating cables," I said, the realization hitting me like a truck. "You actually came onto my property and cut my heating cables." Patricia straightened her spine. "I removed an unauthorized modification that was not approved per Section 7.3 of the HOA guidelines. All exterior modifications must be submitted in writing and approved before installation." "Those are heating cables," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "They prevent ice dams. They are a safety feature, and you cut them during a winter storm warning when it is negative 12 degrees outside." "Rules are rules," Patricia said. "If I make an exception for you, I would have to make exceptions for everyone. The architectural integrity of our community depends on consistent enforcement of our guidelines." Architectural integrity. I could not believe what I was hearing. "They are thin black cables that blend in with the roof. You can barely see them from the ground, and again, they are a safety feature. They were not approved, Patricia repeated. You have been notified of the violation. If you choose to reinstall them without approval, you will be fined $500 per day until they are removed. Have a nice day, Oliver. She turned and walked away before I could respond, her boots crunching on the frozen walkway. I stood in my doorway, cold air flooding into my house, absolutely stunned by what had just happened. An HOA president had just admitted to destroying my property, seemed proud of it, and was threatening me with fines if I fixed it. I went back inside and immediately called my insurance company. The representative I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that since this was an HOA dispute, I would need to go through the HOA's insurance or take legal action against Patricia personally. They recommended I file a police report for property damage and keep detailed records of everything. My next call was to the Burlington Police Department non-emergency line. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, who took my information and said an officer would come by to take a report. Officer Martinez showed up about 2 hours later, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who took notes while I explained everything and showed her the photos. "So your HOA president admitted to cutting these cables?" she asked. "Admitted it and said she had the right to do it because I did not get approval first," I said. Officer Martinez shook her head. "That is not how property rights work. Even in an HOA, she cannot just destroy your property. She would need to go through proper channels, warnings, fines, and potentially legal action if you refuse to comply. But she cannot just walk onto your property and start cutting things." She took photos of her own, got Patricia's address from me, and said she would go speak with her. I gave her copies of the photos I had taken as well. About an hour after Officer Martinez left, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. "Is this Oliver Manning?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Richard Henderson, Patricia's husband. I just wanted to call and apologize for what happened. The police officer just left our house, and Patricia told me what she did. I had no idea she was going around cutting people's heating cables. That is completely unacceptable. I was surprised by this." "Does she understand that she damaged my property?" "She does now," Richard said with a sigh. "Look, between you and me, this HOA president thing has gone to her head. She has always been particular about rules, but lately it has gotten out of control. I will pay for the replacement and installation of your heating cables. Can you get me an estimate?" "I appreciate that," I said. "But this is not just about the money. It is negative 12 degrees outside. Ice is already forming on my roof. In this weather, ice dams can form in hours, not days. I need those cables working today, not next week." "I understand," Richard said. "Get them fixed today, whatever it costs, and send me the bill. And again, I am really sorry about this." After we hung up, I called an emergency electrician who specialized in heating cable installation. He said he could come out that afternoon, but it would cost double his normal rate for emergency service. I told him to come anyway. The total cost was going to be around $1,800, but I was not going to let my roof get damaged because Patricia Henderson had a power trip. The electrician, a guy named Tom who had been doing this for 20 years, showed up around 3 in the afternoon. He got up on my roof, assessed the damage, and whistled low. "Someone really did a number on these," he said. "Cut in 6 different places. This was deliberate." "I know," I said. "Can you fix it today?" "Yeah, I can fix it. Going to take me about 4 hours though, maybe 5. It is cold as hell up here." "Whatever it takes," I said. While Tom worked on my roof, I noticed something. Ice was already forming along my roofline, and there were icicles starting to grow from my gutters. But more importantly, they were growing in the direction of the street. My townhouse faced the street with a small front yard and driveway. Patricia's house was directly across the street from mine, and her precious Mercedes SUV was parked in her driveway, right in the potential fall zone of where these icicles would eventually get big enough to drop. I am not proud of what I thought in that moment, but I was angry. Patricia had damaged my property, put my home at risk, and only seemed to care about her arbitrary rules. Her husband was paying for the repairs, sure, but Patricia herself had shown no remorse at all. So when I realized that if I waited to get my heating cables fixed, those icicles would get large enough to potentially damage her car, I made a decision. I called Tom down from the roof. "Hey Tom, I know you are working fast, but actually, can you slow down a bit? Maybe do not finish until tomorrow." He looked at me confused. "You said it was an emergency. You said you needed it done today." "I changed my mind," I said. "I am going to be out of town tomorrow anyway. Finish it tomorrow afternoon instead. I will pay you for today's time anyway, plus the emergency fee, plus I will add another $200. Take your time." Tom shrugged. "Your money, man. But those icicles are going to get pretty big overnight. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. He packed up his equipment and said he would be back the next afternoon. I paid him for his time that day, and he left. Then I went inside and watched as the temperature dropped and the icicles grew. By evening, they were already 6 inches long. By the time I went to bed, they were close to a foot. I set an alarm for early the next morning. When I woke up at 6 the next morning, it was still dark outside, but I could see the streetlights reflecting off the ice. The icicles were massive now, at least 2 feet long, some even longer. They hung from my gutters like frozen spears, and the weight of them was starting to make the gutters sag slightly. More importantly, they were positioned directly above where Patricia parked her Mercedes every single day. I made coffee and waited. At 7:30, like clockwork, Patricia came out of her house. She was wearing her workout clothes and carrying her yoga mat. She did this every Wednesday morning, I had noticed. She would drive to her yoga class at 8, which meant she was about to move her car from the driveway to the street briefly while she backed out. But first, she always warmed up her car. I watched through my front window as she walked to her Mercedes, remote started it, and then went back inside to grab something she had forgotten. This was it. The car was running, warming up, right under my icicles. The sun was starting to come up, and I knew that as the day warmed, even slightly, those icicles would start to melt and fall. But I was not going to just wait for nature to take its course. I was not that patient. I needed to speed things along. I went to my garage and grabbed a long broom handle, one of those extended ones for cleaning hard-to-reach places. Then I quietly went outside. The morning air was brutally cold, but the sun was definitely warming things up compared to the middle of the night. I could see the very tips of the icicles starting to drip slightly. I walked to the edge of my property, right where my front yard met the sidewalk. Patricia's car was parked maybe 20 feet away, but the icicles overhung far enough that they were almost directly above it. I looked around. No one was on the street. It was early, and most people were still inside having breakfast or getting ready for work. I extended the broom handle and reached up, tapping gently on the gutter beneath where the largest icicles had formed. Nothing happened at first. Then I tapped a bit harder. One icicle cracked and fell, stabbing into the ground harmlessly. I moved to another section and tapped again. This time, 3 large icicles fell at once, and I heard the distinct sound of ice hitting metal and glass. I quickly pulled the broom back and hurried inside my house, watching from my window. The icicles had hit the hood of Patricia's Mercedes. I could not see the damage clearly from my window, but I could see that they had definitely made contact. More icicles were still hanging precariously, starting to melt in the morning sun. Over the next 10 minutes, nature finished what I had started. The warming sun caused more icicles to fall, several of them large and heavy enough to cause real damage. When Patricia finally came back out of her house, yoga mat in hand, she stopped dead in her tracks. "What the hell?" I heard her scream from across the street. I opened my front door and stepped out onto my porch, coffee mug in hand, as if I had just noticed the commotion. "Is everything okay?" I called over. Patricia was standing next to her Mercedes, which now had multiple dents across the hood and one visible crack in the windshield. Broken ice was scattered all around it. "Your icicles destroyed my car," she shouted. I walked across the street slowly, taking my time. When I got to her driveway, I could see the damage clearly. There were at least 4 significant dents in the hood, each about the size of a fist. The windshield had a star-shaped crack on the driver's side, and there was another dent on the roof. "Wow," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "That is really unfortunate. I guess when you cut my heating cables yesterday, you did not think about the consequences." Patricia's face turned red. "You did this on purpose." "I did not make the icicles fall," I said, which was technically true. "Physics and gravity made them fall. I just helped them along. Icicles fall naturally when they get too heavy or when temperatures fluctuate. That is actually why people install heating cables to prevent them from forming in the first place. But since mine were cut by someone, the icicles formed." "You could have had them fixed immediately," Patricia said. "You deliberately left them until they damaged my car." "I scheduled a repair," I said. "The electrician is coming back this afternoon. These things take time." "And honestly, Patricia, after you destroyed my property yesterday, my heating cables were not exactly my top priority. I had to file a police report, deal with insurance companies, and figure out how to prevent my roof from being damaged. I am sorry your car got hit, but this is kind of a natural consequence of your actions." Richard came out of their house then, wearing his bathrobe. "What is going on?" "His icicles destroyed my car," Patricia said, pointing at me. Richard looked at the Mercedes, then up at my roofline where the remaining icicles still hung, then back at me. I saw something in his expression that looked almost like understanding. "Patricia, we talked about this," he said quietly. "You cut his heating cables." "Heating cables prevent ice buildup. This is exactly what happens when ice builds up." "He did this on purpose," Patricia insisted. "Can you prove that?" I asked. "Because I can prove you cut my cables. I have photos, timestamps, and your own admission to a police officer. What do you have?" "Icicles that formed naturally on my roof and fell naturally due to gravity." Richard put his hand on Patricia's shoulder. "Let us go inside and call our insurance company." "Insurance is not going to cover this," Patricia said. "This is not weather damage, this is neighbor damage." "Actually," I said, "I think you will find that falling ice from a nearby property is considered an act of nature in most insurance policies. But I am not an insurance expert. You should definitely call them and find out." I walked back to my house, finished my coffee, and waited for Tom to arrive. He showed up around 1 in the afternoon and got back to work on my heating cables. By 3 o'clock, they were fully repaired and functioning. By 4 o'clock, the ice on my roof was melting in a controlled way, flowing through my gutters instead of forming dangerous icicles. The rest of that day was quiet, but I knew this was not over. Patricia Henderson was not the type to let things go. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a formal violation notice, a fine for $500 for maintaining hazardous ice formations that caused property damage to a neighbor, and a second fine for $500 for refusing to immediately remediate a dangerous condition. I called Richard that evening. He picked up on the second ring. "Richard, I just got a letter from the HOA," I said. $1,000 in fines." He sighed heavily. "I know, Patricia is. She is really upset about her car. The insurance company said they will cover it minus her deductible, but she is convinced you did this on purpose, and she wants you to pay for it." "I maintained my property the way I am supposed to," I said. "She cut my heating cables, which caused ice to form. That is not my fault." "That is her fault." "I agree with you," Richard said, "but she is the HOA president and she is using that authority to fine you. I have tried talking to her, but she is not listening." "Then I guess I will see her in court," I said. I spent the next few days putting together a case. I printed out all my photos, got a written statement from Tom the electrician explaining what heating cables do and why they are necessary, got a copy of the police report from Officer Martinez, and researched Vermont property law regarding HOAs. What I found was interesting. Vermont has some of the strongest property rights laws in the country, and HOAs have limited authority compared to other states. They can enforce reasonable rules about aesthetics and shared spaces, but they cannot enforce rules that compromise safety or essential home maintenance. Heating cables in Vermont winter qualified as essential home maintenance. I also found out that HOA fines have to go through a specific process. They need to provide written notice, allow time for the homeowner to respond, hold a hearing if the homeowner disputes the fine, and only then can they actually assess a penalty. Patricia had skipped all of those steps. I wrote a detailed response to the HOA, citing specific Vermont laws and HOA regulations that Patricia had violated. I pointed out that she had not followed proper procedure for the fines, that heating cables were essential safety equipment in Vermont, and therefore exempt from architectural review, and that any damage caused by ice formation was a direct result of her illegal destruction of my property. I sent copies to the HOA board, Patricia personally, and kept several copies for myself. 3 weeks went by. The weather stayed cold, but my heating cables worked perfectly. My roof was clear, my gutters were flowing, and my heating bills were actually lower than they had been before because my attic was properly regulated. Patricia's Mercedes was in the shop for 2 weeks getting repaired. When it came back, it looked good as new, but I heard through neighborhood gossip that the repairs cost almost $4,000, and her insurance deductible was $1,500. Richard apparently paid it without complaint. Then I got a notice in the mail about an emergency HOA board meeting. The notice said that there would be a vote regarding my violations and fines, and I had the right to attend and speak. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents, photos, and printed out law references. The clubhouse was a small building at the entrance to our development, mostly used for occasional neighborhood gatherings. When I walked in, I saw Patricia sitting at the front table with 3 other board members, Dennis Walsh, Margaret Chen, and Robert Torres. About a dozen other neighbors were scattered in the chairs, apparently interested in the drama. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. "This meeting will come to order. We are here to discuss violations and fines assessed to Oliver Manning of 42 Maple Grove Lane. Mr. Manning, you have been assessed 2 fines totaling $1,000 for maintaining hazardous conditions and failing to remediate those conditions. Do you have anything to say?" I stood up and walked to the front. Yes, I have a lot to say. First, these fines were improperly assessed. According to the HOA bylaws and Vermont state law, you are required to provide written notice, allow 14 days for response, and hold a hearing before assessing fines. You did none of those things. We provided written notice with the fine letter, Patricia said. That is not written notice before the fine, I said. That is notification of a fine after you already decided to assess it. That is not proper procedure. Margaret Chen, who was the HOA secretary, spoke up. He is right, Patricia. We are supposed to notify first, then fine. Patricia glared at her but did not respond directly. Fine. We are having a hearing now. That is why we are all here. Second, I continued, the reason for the fines is that I allegedly maintained hazardous ice formations. But those ice formations only existed because you personally came onto my property and cut my heating cables, which are specifically designed to prevent ice formation. You destroyed essential safety equipment and then fined me for the consequences of your own actions. Those heating cables were not approved, Patricia said. They do not require approval under Vermont law, I said, pulling out a printed page. This is Vermont Statute Title 27, Section 5, Subsection 4, which states that HOAs cannot restrict essential home maintenance and safety equipment. Heating cables in Vermont winter qualify as essential safety equipment. This has been tested in court 3 times in the past 5 years, and the homeowner won every time. I handed copies of the statute to each board member. Robert Torres, who was the treasurer, read it carefully and then looked at Patricia. This seems pretty clear, he said. Third, I said, you filed a police report for the damage to your car, correct? Patricia straightened. No, but I could have. Actually, you could not have, because icicles falling from a roof are an act of nature, not a criminal act. But I filed a police report against you for destroying my property. Would you like to see it? I pulled out a copy of the police report and handed it to the board. Dennis Walsh read it and frowned. Patricia, did you really cut his heating cables? He asked. They were not approved, Patricia said, her voice tight. I have the authority to enforce HOA rules. You do not have the authority to destroy people's property, Dennis said. This is a problem. Finally, I said, I am happy to pay these fines if you think they are legitimate. But if I pay them, I will be filing a lawsuit against Patricia Henderson personally and against the HOA for the cost of my heating cable replacement, the cost of my time dealing with this situation, and damages for harassment and improper use of HOA authority. The heating cable replacement alone was $1,800. My lawyer has estimated that with damages, we would be asking for around $15,000. So you can waive these $1,000 in fines, or you can deal with a $15,000 lawsuit. Your choice. The room was completely silent. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. The other board members were looking at each other with obvious concern. Margaret spoke first. I move that we waive the fines against Oliver Manning and apologize for this situation. Second, Robert said immediately. All in favor? Dennis asked. 3 hands went up. Patricia did not raise hers. Motion passes, Dennis said. Mr. Manning, your fines are waived and we apologize for this situation. Patricia, I think we need to have a separate discussion about proper procedures. I nodded. Thank you. And just so we are clear, my heating cables are staying. If anyone touches them again, I will press criminal charges for vandalism and sue for damages. I left the meeting feeling satisfied but not entirely victorious. Patricia was still the HOA president, and I knew she was going to hold this grudge. I was right. Over the next 2 months, I received violation notices for the most ridiculous things imaginable. My trash can was supposedly visible from the street on a non-trash day, even though it was in my garage with the door closed. My front door wreath was allegedly not an approved decoration. My car was supposedly parked too close to the sidewalk in my own driveway. Every single notice came with a threat of fines. I responded to each one with detailed rebuttals, photos proving the violations did not exist, and references to HOA bylaws that Patricia was misinterpreting. But it was exhausting. I was spending hours every week dealing with her harassment. Other neighbors started complaining too. I found out that Patricia had ramped up enforcement across the entire community, not just targeting me. People were getting fined for having the wrong color porch lights, for garden decorations being 2 inches too tall, for cars parked in driveways for more than 48 consecutive hours. The HOA Facebook group became a stream of complaints about Patricia's overreach. Finally, in early March, Dennis Walsh organized a recall vote. He collected signatures from over 60% of the homeowners in the community, which was more than enough to trigger a special election. The notice went out that there would be a vote on whether to remove Patricia as HOA president and potentially dissolve the current board. Patricia fought back hard. She sent emails to every homeowner listing all the things she claimed to have accomplished during her presidency. She argued that she was just enforcing rules that everyone had agreed to when they bought their homes. She accused Dennis and me of running a smear campaign against her, but it did not work. The vote was held on a Saturday afternoon in late March, and the turnout was huge. Almost every homeowner showed up or sent in an absentee ballot. When the votes were counted, 72% voted to remove Patricia as president. A second vote approved a complete restructuring of the board and a review of all HOA rules to remove overly restrictive ones. Patricia was furious. She stood up at the meeting and gave a speech about how ungrateful everyone was, how she had worked tirelessly to maintain property values, and how we were all going to regret this decision when the neighborhood fell into chaos. Then she stormed out with Richard following behind her, looking embarrassed. The new board was elected a week later. Dennis became the new president. Margaret stayed on as secretary, and 2 new members joined. Thomas Kim and Sarah Oakes, both of whom were reasonable people who just wanted the neighborhood to function smoothly without constant drama. One of the first things the new board did was pass a resolution explicitly allowing heating cables, satellite dishes, solar panels, and other practical home improvements without requiring architectural committee approval. They also implemented a new rule that any HOA board member who destroyed homeowner property would be immediately removed from the board and personally liable for damages. But the story did not end there. In mid-April, I got a phone call from Officer Martinez. "Mr. Manning, this is Officer Martinez from Burlington PD. Do you remember the report you filed back in January about your heating cables being cut?" "Yes, of course," I said. "Well, I wanted to give you an update. We are moving forward with charges against Patricia Henderson for criminal mischief and destruction of property. The district attorney decided there was enough evidence to prosecute." I was surprised. "Really? I thought this was just going to be a civil matter." "It would have been," Officer Martinez said, "except we got 3 more complaints after yours. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson cut someone's TV cable line because they had not hidden it properly according to HOA rules. She damaged someone's fence because it was supposedly 6 inches too tall, and she actually cut down someone's tree because she claimed it was blocking her view. That last one pushed it over the edge because the tree was on their property and worth about $3,000. "Wow," I said. "I knew she was out of control, but I did not know she was doing this to other people too. Yeah, it is a pattern of behavior. She is being charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of criminal trespass. She is looking at potential jail time if convicted on all counts. What happens now? I asked. She will be arraigned next week, and then there will be a trial unless she takes a plea deal. You might be called as a witness. I will keep you updated. The next few months were a whirlwind. Patricia was arrested and arraigned. She pleaded not guilty and insisted she was just enforcing HOA rules. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had implied authority as HOA president to enter properties and remove violations, but the judge shut that down immediately, pointing out that HOA authority has strict limits and definitely does not include destroying property. The trial happened in late June. I was called to testify, along with Tom the electrician, Officer Martinez, and the 3 other homeowners whose property Patricia had damaged. Richard testified too, and I actually felt bad for him. He seemed like a decent guy who was stuck with a wife who had completely lost perspective. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, police reports, Patricia's own admissions that she had removed the heating cables and the other items. Her defense was essentially that she was just doing her job as HOA president. But the prosecutor systematically destroyed that argument by showing that HOA authority does not extend to property destruction, that she had not followed proper procedures, and that she had continued this behavior even after being warned by police. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, suspended to probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution to all the homeowners whose property she had damaged. For me, that meant she had to pay the full $1,800 for my heating cable repairs, plus an additional $500 for my time and trouble. Richard paid the restitution immediately. He also put their house up for sale. I ran into him at the grocery store in early July, a few weeks after the trial. "Oliver, hey," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Richard," I said. "How are you holding up?" He sighed. "As well as can be expected, we are moving. Patricia cannot handle living here anymore after everything that happened. We are looking at places in South Burlington, somewhere without an HOA. Probably for the best," I said. For what it is worth, I never wanted things to escalate this far. I just wanted her to leave my heating cables alone. "I know," Richard said, "and I do not blame you. Patricia let the power go to her head. I tried to tell her she was going too far, but she would not listen. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for her. She starts her community service next week." They moved out in August. A nice young couple bought their house, and they were much more laid back. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community concerns like snow removal and maintaining common areas, not on measuring people's wreaths and counting how many hours cars sat in driveways. My heating cables worked perfectly through the next winter. No ice dams, no icicles, no problems. I did not get a single violation notice all season. In February of the following year, I was shoveling my driveway after a snowstorm when Dennis walked over from across the street. "Hey, Oliver, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what is up?" "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "for standing up to Patricia last year. I know it was a pain dealing with all her harassment, but you refusing to back down is what finally made everyone else realize how out of control she had gotten. If you had just paid those fines and let it go, she would probably still be terrorizing everyone." I leaned on my shovel. "I am not really a hero or anything. I was just mad that she cut my heating cables and I wanted her to face consequences." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Dennis said. One person being willing to say enough is enough. Anyway, I wanted you to know that the neighborhood appreciates it, even if we did not all say so directly. After he left, I thought about everything that had happened. It had started with something so simple, such a petty act of vandalism by an HOA president who thought rules mattered more than people. But that one act had cascaded into icicles falling, car damage, legal battles, an election, criminal charges, and ultimately someone going to jail. All because Patricia Henderson could not stand the sight of black heating cables on someone's roof. The irony was not lost on me. If she had just left my heating cables alone, none of this would have happened. She would still be HOA president, probably still making everyone miserable but not facing criminal charges. Her car would be undamaged. She would not have a criminal record. She and Richard would still be living across the street, but she could not leave it alone. She had to enforce her rules, no matter how unreasonable, no matter the consequences. And when natural consequences came in the form of falling ice, she tried to blame me instead of accepting responsibility for her own actions. I finished shoveling my driveway and went inside. My house was warm, my heating system was working perfectly, and my heating cables were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Outside, the temperature was dropping again as evening approached, but I knew no dangerous icicles would form on my roof. The heating cables hummed quietly, doing their job, keeping ice at bay. They were still the same cables Tom had installed, still functioning perfectly. They had outlasted Patricia's presidency, outlasted her time in the neighborhood, outlasted her freedom before her conviction. Sometimes the smallest things matter most. A heating cable keeping a roof clear, a homeowner willing to stand up for property rights, a community finally saying enough is enough. That winter passed without incident. Spring came and the heating cables were turned off for the season. The neighborhood bloomed with flowers and green lawns. Kids played in the streets without anyone measuring whether their chalk drawings were within approved color palettes. People parked their cars in their driveways without counting the hours. The HOA still existed, but it was focused on what mattered: maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling disputes in a reasonable way. Dennis was a fair president who actually listened to homeowners instead of dictating to them. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had completed her community service and probation without incident. Richard told someone at the grocery store that she had joined a book club and was seeing a therapist. She never apologized to me directly, but Richard passed along a message that she understood she had been wrong and hoped I was doing well. I accepted that. I was not interested in holding a grudge forever. What mattered was that the situation had been resolved, justice had been served, and my property rights had been protected. As for my heating cables, they are still there, still functioning perfectly. Every winter when I turn them on and watch as my roof stays clear while my neighbors' roofs accumulate ice, I am reminded of that ridiculous situation, and how something so simple became so complicated, because one person could not accept that rules need to make sense. The new couple who bought Patricia's house, Jake and Emily Morrison, installed heating cables of their own that first winter. They came over to ask my advice about which brand to buy and how to install them properly. I recommended Tom, who did an excellent job for them too. Now, on cold winter mornings, I can look out my window and see heating cables on half a dozen houses in the neighborhood, all keeping roofs clear and preventing ice dams. No one has to ask permission. No one has to worry about violation notices. They are just a practical safety feature that makes sense in Vermont winters. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had not let those icicles fall on Patricia's car. If I had just fixed my heating cables immediately and pursued legal action without any petty revenge, would the outcome have been different? Maybe. Maybe not. But I cannot deny that watching those icicles fall and hearing them crunch into the hood of her Mercedes gave me a satisfaction that a legal victory alone would not have provided. It was a tangible, immediate consequence for her actions. Cause and effect in the most literal sense. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it justified? I think so. Did it make the whole situation worse in some ways? Probably. But would I do it again? Yeah, I think I would. Because sometimes, when someone cuts your heating cables in the middle of a Vermont winter, you need to let them see exactly what happens when ice is allowed to form unchecked. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson about consequences is to let those consequences play out naturally. The heating cables are still there, still working. The icicles have long since melted. Patricia's car got repaired and then sold when they moved. But the memory of that morning, watching ice fall and justice served in its own strange way, remains. My name is Oliver Manning. I live in Burlington, Vermont. And I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself means letting nature take its course, even if you give nature a little nudge in the right direction. And I learned that HOA presidents are not above the law, no matter how much they think rules give them unlimited authority. Most importantly, I learned that heating cables are worth every penny, not just for what they do to your roof, but for the peace of mind they bring. No ice dams, no leaks, no damage. Just a clear roof and warm house, exactly as it should be. And if an HOA president ever tries to cut them again, well, I have Officer Martinez's number saved in my phone, a good lawyer on speed dial, and excellent documentation skills. But I do not think that will be necessary. The neighborhood learned its lesson too. We have a good HOA board now, reasonable rules, and a community that actually works together instead of being terrorized by someone on a power trip. The heating cables hum quietly through each winter, doing their job without drama or fanfare, just like a good HOA should operate. Functional, helpful, and staying out of the way of people just trying to live their lives in peace. That is really what this whole story comes down to. People just want to live in peace, maintain their homes properly, and not be harassed over things that do not matter. When an HOA loses sight of that and starts caring more about enforcing arbitrary rules than about the actual well-being of the community, something has gone seriously wrong. Patricia Henderson lost sight of that. She paid the price. And now, 2 years later, the neighborhood is better for it. We have reasonable leadership, clear boundaries on what the HOA can and cannot do, and a community that learned the importance of standing up to unreasonable authority. All because of heating cables and falling ice. Sometimes the smallest things change everything.